Welcome back to Ozarks Tonight. There's been a string of abortion rulings passed across the country in the last few weeks, and one here in the state of Missouri as well. And ongoing litigation in St. Louis could make Missouri the first state since 1973 to not have an abortion provider. So we wanted to bring in our Dr. Brian Califano joining us today to kind of ask him about some of these rulings. Brian, is there anything to all these rulings coming to fruition at the same time?
Hey, John, good to see you tonight. Yeah, there certainly is something to all of this in the sense that if, for example, the clinic in St. Louis ends up closing, as you said, there'll be a variety of people who are seeking abortion services in the state of Missouri who will have to go elsewhere. You bring up 1973. Abortion was legal in several states prior to Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court decision that came down in January of '73. And what ended up happening was a lot of people in the middle of the country, like in Missouri and Texas, which was the state where the case that became Roe versus Wade actually started, those folks would end up going to California or New York to get abortions. And the concern among those who are on the so-called pro-choice side of this issue is that that's what we're returning to by having a situation where you have an entire state with more than 6 million people, 1 million of which are of reproductive age and would have the decisions to make about carrying a pregnancy to term and becoming parents and those sorts of things, would not have access to abortion services. For folks on the other side, though, they'll say, look, all life is precious. An innocent life is an innocent life. To give the decision to somebody else as to whether or not that developing child or fetus or whatever term you want to use ends up being extinguished, that's just not constitutional. That's not what we believe in our political system. And so this issue has been one that has been almost the hottest of rails, if you will, political rails in this country for a very long time. And why we're at the stage we are now is because for decades, those on the so-called pro-life side of the issue have pushed for the kinds of restrictions on abortion that they wish to see, and they haven't been able to this point, get Roe versus Wade overturned. And they're also looking at this point at a Supreme Court with at least 5 conservative justices. And if President Trump is reelected next year, it's very likely that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who may be the most liberal of the 4 justices left on the court who are of the liberal mindset, would end up leaving the court and be replaced by a conservative, giving at least 5 conservative votes to overturn Roe v. Wade. The reason I say 5 and not 6, John, is because a lot of legal observers think that Chief Justice John Roberts, who has a lot of institutionally minded viewpoints about government and the role of the court and precedent, because remember, Roe v. Wade is now well over 40 years old, so it's 40 years of federal judicial precedent at this point that provides access to abortion services for women, that he would swing with the 3 liberals. And so if you ended up having a challenge to Roe v. Wade right now, I think you'd have a 5-4 in favor of keeping the status quo. If when you get into a possible second term of the Trump presidency, you could very well end up having a 5-4 swing the other way and have abortion overturned. What happens in that case, or I should say Roe v. Wade overturned, what happens in that case is that it becomes a state-level decision with each state deciding for itself whether to permit abortion and under what conditions and how to regulate different abortion clinics. And Missouri at that point may not be the only state without abortion access. There may be up to 25 or 26 states that almost immediately make abortion illegal, should that case to challenge Roe v. Wade be successful in the Supreme Court.
Sure, and what's the likelihood that one of these cases will make it to the U.S. Supreme Court here in the next, next year or two? Is that pretty likely to happen?
Well, and again, that's the crystal ball aspect of all of this. Do you end up having this sort of outright challenge to a judicial precedent? And honestly, I don't think we're going to end up seeing a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade in the next year or two. And the reason for that, again, as I said, the current makeup of the court is such that you have John Roberts likely swinging with the 4 progressive or liberal justices and looking to maintain status quo.
And while we have you here, Dr. Califano, I want to ask you real quickly, Robert Mueller spoke yesterday in D.C. I want to hear what your takeaways are from that press conference he had, and are we going to be moving past the Mueller report, or is this something that's going to stay in the news for a while still yet?
I think the Democrats are going to use what former Director and Special Counsel Mueller said yesterday to help bolster their direct mailings and to get people out to support their candidates at the polls and give them monetary contributions. I don't expect to see Nancy Pelosi and the House leadership push for impeachment at this point. This is the last thing they want to hand President Trump in terms of a rhetorical tool to sort of beat them over the head with over the next year and a half before the 2020 election. I think, though, that it's important to hear and really listen to what Director Mueller underscored yesterday, I should say, when he said that, look, we in our office did the best job that we could, and what we found was no evidence of obstruction or of collusion. There was some on both counts. We, A, didn't find enough to bring a charge of some kind of collusion with Russia, and we don't have the ability to indict a sitting president as those working for the Justice Department. That's far different from saying there was no evidence of collusion and there was no evidence of obstruction. There was potential evidence there, and those who read the report themselves can make up their mind as to what constituted evidence in those cases. But at the end of the day, I think really this was just underscoring what should have been underscored from the very beginning had the Attorney General done what he should have done, I think, in that 4-page memo, and basically say something that was a little bit more nuanced than essentially there's no evidence of anything here, because that's not quite what Director Mueller came up with in terms of a conclusion for that report itself.
Sure. I bet both of these issues are definitely going to stay in the news as we head toward the 2020 election. Dr. Brian Calfano, thanks for joining us today. We'll be back with more Ozarks Tonight right after this.